What's That Melody? Wabbit Tales Flash Fiction, Story Number 1. Rain pelted the coated nylon of Anya's burgundy raincoat as she tugged the edges of the hood closer around her face, her cold fingers aching in protest. Her eyes scanned the weathered trail signs at the foot of a hill offering up two directions. The left, Whispering Pines Trail. The right, Mystic Grove Trail. Anya chuckled to herself at the fulfillment of the sense of mystery and wonder the names invoked before opting for the left trail and beginning her ascension. Anya grew up in Emerald Valley, a small and idyllic town nestled in the evergreens, as if Mother Nature herself gently cradled the forest in her hands. She navigated her home with ease, drawing in its sweet, sappy air. Home. Emerald Valley was her home. Every gray cloud that suffocated the sun for days or weeks at a time, every dirt road that wove around the surrounding hills and back again, and every legend that passed the lips of the residents. This was her home, in every regard that word held. But the forest, this forest, had always held a feeling that was beyond home, a feeling of belonging, of being truly seen and understood. The feelings of connection she felt here were something she was told could never be, that she must ignore them or even forget them altogether. But no matter how hard she tried to deny the connection, it only grew stronger. Her inner core rebelled against these orders, the ones that were hurled at her a few hours ago from her own mother, words that were meant to control her, a certainty she had no doubt of. "You need to drop this, Anya. Now," her mother had snapped. Her voice a sharp knife, cutting through the air, the hand towel she was holding now flung across the table as if signifying just how deep her frustration ran. Anya slumped in the stool at the counter, leaning against the cool marble surface. "I just want to go for a hike, that's all." Her mother held her stare, those honey golden eyes, warm and inviting, with a hint of mischief in their depths. An uncanny likeness to her own, so she had been told throughout her life. All 19 years of it. They scanned her. Anya could feel the weight of them over every inch of her petite body, a deviation of every other female in her family. "Why tonight?" her mother finally questioned. "Of all nights, the storm is not to be taken lightly, I've heard." Her hand swept across the window behind her, facing out to the vastness of the valley of homes and trees stretching out, or more, reaching out, to her. To Anya. And she wanted to answer. She needed to answer. But with that tug came a jolt of awareness back to her mother, who began shifting her own focus to the dinner she was preparing. "I'll be back before nightfall," promise laced every word, every syllable. "I just need to get some fresh air, get out and clear my head." Promise turned to pleading. The months following graduation were filled with more stress and heartache than she had expected. The forest's embrace beckoned, whispering its own promises of solace and connection. She ached to run to its arms, to lose herself in its verdant depths and find something, anything, to cling to. It was becoming harder and harder to resist that call. And tonight, it was unbearable to ignore. But nightfall brought with it its own stories. Stories people like her mother preferred stayed in the night and out of conversation. With eyes narrowed into slits, Anya's mother raised a pointed finger. "Fine, but if you're not back before the sun sets, I'll unleash your father on you." With her threat now out in the open, Anya's mother resumed her dinner preparations. Typical. It was well within her parenting style to bluster and intimidate, but leave the actual disciplining to her husband, absolving herself of any responsibility for the outcome. They never understood her draw to the world outside the safety of their cozy home. Though quietly she still heard and felt the judgment of her family and friends for her constant need to be outside, amongst these trees, breathing this air. This need had only grown more intense, more powerful in the last couple of weeks, putting aside all the tales and fables that wove themselves through the town's very structure. The stories of mysteries far beyond any understanding could fathom, living deep in the forests she was now trekking. Alone. So many of the people who surrounded her space have feared these woods, these trails. She knew it was because deep down they all believed these stories on some molecular level. Evil lives out there. She had heard the statement passed from lip to lip, stranger to stranger, her whole life. She was nurtured in the fear it was meant to induce, but it was never fear she found, nor felt. It was curiosity. That curious pull tugging her into the forest since she was 13 years old. As the years went on, the tug pulled her deeper and deeper, and no evil was found, no malice was felt. Just pure serenity and peace welcomed her, embraced her in a way that became intoxicating. It became a need rather than a want, and it was this need that pushed her further up the trail, that peace and calm welcoming her with each step forward. Anya peeked over her hood at the darkening sky as the rain began to fall with more ferocity. She scanned the clouds for any sort of break that would give way to the sun's location on the horizon, but they were locked tight. Encasing her and the forest, she kept as company in its moody grasp. Dropping her gaze from the storm's looming presence, she studied her place on the trail and found her surroundings foreign to her. A drop of worry trailed down her spine, pooling around her core as she began circling in place, looking for any sign of familiarity. She had walked this trail more times than she could count. She had known each curve and turn as deeply as she had memorized the confines of her claustrophobic bedroom. Yet she stood in a place she was certain she had never stood before. It was then that the worry tingling in her gut gave way to recollection. Behind the judgmental narrative of the so-called evil lurking behind these trees lived a legend that few considered. If you hear music in the woods after sundown, do not follow it, for it is the cry of lost souls searching for all eternity, and answering it will cost you your own soul. The melodramatic fable she spent years dismissing and even scoffing at now held her by the throat. Claws dug in with each fall of her rapidly beating heart. Because with that recollection, she could have sworn she heard the faintest of melodies, so faint she could hardly discern it, yet still distinct in its lilting quality, carried on the crisp pine-scented breeze. It floated past her on the air like wisps of smoke and beckoned her to close her eyes, willing her to let the notes wash over her. So she did. She sealed her golden eyes behind her lids and let the melody carry her away to that place her peace and tranquility awaited. The notes themselves were like drops of water, each one shimmering with its own unique light. They danced and swirled around each other, creating a tapestry of sound that was both delicate and complex. As the melody progressed, Anya was unaware that her feet were taking her with the music as the notes grew increasingly magical, taking on an ethereal quality, as if they were being played by instruments not of this world. They wove together in a spellbinding enchantment that filled her very soul and the air around her with wonder. It was not until the melody reached its high crescendo that she realized she was now standing in a clearing etched so perfectly in the trees it looked anything but natural. A clearing she knew with every fiber of her soul should not be here. The notes began to fall back around her, disappearing around the clearing as if inviting her to follow further. And then she saw it. She saw her. Amidst the falling stillness of the forest, a woman danced. She was the vision of ethereal beauty, cloaked in a gown of purest white, her hair cascading like a waterfall of midnight ink. She danced with an otherworldly grace. Her movements were fluid, as if she were not bound by the constraints of gravity. Anya watched in enchantment as the woman danced, her movements weaving their own kind of spell in precise and exact motion before her gaze was drawn to the woman's feet, expecting to find them brushing against the moss and grass-covered earth. A breath caught in her throat as she found them suspended weightlessly in mid-air. She was floating, her body defying gravity's relentless pull. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the woman dance, her beauty mesmerizing and captivating. It too was as otherworldly as the grace that she seemed to wield so effortlessly. But as the woman's form twirled and glided, Anya's awe turned to a mix of fear and fascination as the spells woven by both the melody and the woman began to slip from her senses, letting clarity seep back in. The tales and fables she grew up around were fairies, though no one ever put name to legend the way her mind did in that moment. They had been talked about, verbally dissected over the dinner table or in hushed conversations, their existence spoken only in a manner of fiction, but laced with just enough fear to indicate some level of credibility, a consideration hidden behind a small town's legend. Anya was no stranger to the conjecture of the mischievous and alluring creatures of the forest, and she could not shake the feeling that the woman before her was one of them. The woman stopped dancing and locked her silver eyes on Anya's, turning her body in another movement as fluid as the enchanting melody that had carried her in, which now began to fall away fully, leaving nothing but the sound of rustling trees as their atmosphere. Anya felt excitement coursing through her veins as this woman began to sweep her limbs into motion, inching closer and closer as if moving to a melody only she could hear. She knew she should be afraid, that fairies were not to be trifled with, but she could not help but be captivated by the woman's beauty and the humming electricity her gaze held. A gaze that did not hold malevolence or even a tint of hostility, but a request. "Join me," they asked in a wordless invitation. A jolt of energy surged through Anya as she was cradled in the celestial pools of light that was this woman's watch. She was being summoned by the fairy, and everything in her wanted to answer, to release all holds within herself and follow wherever this creature intended to go. Answering the call will cost you your own soul. The words tapped against the magic spell she was so willingly succumbing to, but the warning bells sounded too late, for Anya had already handed that soul of hers over as she draped her pale, rain-soaked hand into the creature's open palm. A profound sense of peace washed over her, and she found a deep sense of wonder and awe. Her peace, her understanding, her belonging, that tug that claimed her 6 years ago. It was here in this moment she realized she truly found her place. So, she followed the creature to the center of the clearing and gave herself over to the magic that called her, and she honored that request.